the man had just gone on a business trip, when his wife callously abandoned him. It took him a lot to make the decision, to prepare to sign the divorce papers, but just as he was halfway through signing, the pen ran out of ink. Reluctantly, he put on his coat and went to the supermarket to buy a new pen, but on his way back home, he accidentally dropped the pen on the street. When he bent down to pick it up, a car suddenly sped toward him. When he woke up, he found himself in a hospital. The first person he saw was a strange woman, but what surprised him was that she was incredibly caring and gentle. After a brief conversation, Nick learned that she was the one who caused the accident, but looking at her beautiful face, Nick didn't feel any resentment. In fact, despite his injuries, he invited her to dinner, and through those meetings, Laura gradually developed feelings for Nick. But when she found out Nick was married, her reason forced her to suppress her feelings. However, because of the guilt she felt, Laura specially invited Nick and his wife to dinner at her restaurant's grand opening. The opening day quickly arrived. Nick dressed up, excitedly heading to Laura's restaurant. When tasting the dish Laura made herself, the unique flavor immediately won over his taste buds. He didn't hesitate to give her a perfect score. While talking, Laura learned that Nick had returned to being single. This news was like a flame that ignited the long-hidden love between them. Driven by hormones, they were completely immersed in each other, and spent a sweet, passionate night together. The next morning, as Nick was about to leave, he accidentally saw Laura's Michelin chef certificate. At this moment, he suddenly realized her talent. The gap between them was so vast that it filled him with a sense of panic, and instinctively, he wanted to run away. But at that moment, Laura unexpectedly called him back, and bravely expressed her feelings. In that moment, Nick was deeply moved by her sincerity and courage. From then on, they began a romantic love journey. As their relationship grew closer, they confided in each other about their vulnerable moments in the past. Even if it was just brief separations, they both felt a strong sense of not wanting to part. But this sweet romance almost fell apart due to their issues with having children. Nick longed to build a family with Laura, and wanted to have a child together with her. But Laura honestly admitted she wasn't ready to be a mother. Faced with this difference, Nick didn't want to drag it out any longer, so he decided to openly express his thoughts to Laura. It's better to say it now than wait for the future. But Laura didn't want to be bound by love, and didn't want to think about having children right now. Nick's impatience also made her feel disrespected. So they broke up in sadness. During their time apart, Nick lived in misery. Every day felt like hell. It was then that he realized just how deeply he had fallen in love with Laura. To salvage the fractured relationship, he went to apologize to Laura on her birthday. He sincerely expressed to Laura that he had realized the initial thoughts had deeply hurt her. Love is the harmony of souls. Time is not for achieving goals, but to enjoy and experience with all your heart. Some things need to unfold naturally, although others may not fully understand the deep meaning of that. Laura could feel his sincerity and regret. In the end, she chose to forgive him. To let their families witness their happy moment, they invited both sets of parents to gather, and held a simple but warm wedding ceremony. But as they were lost in their joy, an unexpected event occurred. After everyone had left, Laura suddenly experienced severe stomach pain, and her complexion turned pale. Seeing this, Nick immediately rushed her to the hospital. After a series of tests, the doctor's initial diagnosis was a possible infection. Just as they were about to breathe a sigh of relief, a shocking news came in. Laura was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. This harsh reality immediately devastated Nick, to the point where he could barely breathe. The doctor presented two treatment options. One was to remove the entire uterus, to reduce the risk of recurrence. But this also meant that Laura would lose the ability to bear children permanently. The second option was to keep at least one ovary, but face a higher risk of recurrence. Having spent time together, Laura understood that if she left, Nick would be devastated. Therefore, she wanted to leave a glimmer of hope for the one she loved. In the uncertain future ahead, the person who had once opposed having children was now resolutely choosing to keep one ovary. Although she knew this was not the best choice, she remained determined to choose it. And Nick knew he couldn't change Laura's decision. Reluctantly, he could only respect her choice. From then on, Laura's life was tortured by illness. But every time Nick was by her side, her heart would swell with warmth. It seemed as if even the darkness was driven away by their love. At the same time, they began their plan to have a child. In the cycle of failure and hope, so many times, hope vanished, but they never stopped nurturing their faith and kept trying. But fate does not disappoint the persistent. The moment the pregnancy test showed 2 lines, all their efforts turned into tears of happiness. As a strong support for his wife, Nick fully fulfilled his responsibilities as a husband. He not only took on all the household chores, but also closely monitored his wife's health. He never missed a single prenatal checkup, carefully recording every indicator, every important change. In this way, they eagerly waited for the birth of their little one. Time quickly passed, and soon it was the 40th week. Laura also began to show signs of labor. As planned, they immediately went to the hospital, but fate played another cruel trick on them. The car got stuck in traffic. Even worse, when Laura went to the restroom, she was accidentally locked inside. Nick frantically called for assistance, but at the crucial moment, the key broke in the lock. Nick had no choice but to use all his strength to break the door, but when he finally reached Laura, he found that she had already started giving birth. It was an extremely urgent situation. He could only call the doctor for help, and follow the doctor's instructions, with the help of gas station staff to assist in delivering the baby. But fortunately, the baby was born safely. The cry of the newborn broke the tense atmosphere. As Laura tightly held her daughter in her arms, all the pain and exhaustion immediately disappeared in the flood of happiness. In the following days, the arrival of their daughter was like warm sunlight, chasing away all the gloom. The house was always filled with laughter. And so, they spent 3 years of happy and peaceful life together. But fate is always full of cruel tricks. One day, while Laura was focused on her work, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her abdomen, causing her to be unable to stand. Her colleague immediately asked her if she was okay. As expected, Laura's ovarian cancer had relapsed, and the condition was much worse than before. The cancer cells had spread, and the tumor was growing larger. The doctor suggested a complicated treatment plan. First, chemotherapy to shrink the tumor, then proceed with surgery, and finally, chemotherapy again to completely destroy the cancer cells. When Nick heard this, his heart felt like it was being torn apart. But he understood that Laura, who was bearing the illness, was in much more pain. So he tried to suppress all his sorrow inside. He told himself not to fall apart, but to be a strong support for Laura. But with the uncertainty of recovery, they both carried heavy hearts. On the way back, it was Laura who finally broke the suffocating silence. She understood that what she needed most right now was not repeated chemotherapy and surgeries, but a way to live happily and with dignity until the very end of her life. She would rather live 6 wonderful, radiant months than 12 long, painful, and helpless months. Upon hearing Laura's thoughts, Nick was at a loss for words. Not knowing what to say to comfort her, he tried to remain calm, forcing a smile, albeit reluctantly. But the pain, like a broken dam, poured from his eyes, bringing down all the layers of disguise he had tried to build. Although Laura had prepared for the worst, deep down, Nick still hoped that she would accept treatment and overcome the illness. At the same time, a bold idea began to form in his mind. When Laura opened the door and walked in after work, the sight before her left her stunned. It turned out that Nick had secretly prepared a surprise. She followed the flickering candlelight to the bedroom, and saw Nick standing there amidst countless glowing candles. His gaze was determined, mixed with sorrow. Then he made his decision known to Laura. But this decision was also a sentence for Laura's life. Although Nick had written his confession, now his throat seemed choked, unable to speak the words. The poem was filled with sorrow and separation. Seeing the tears glistening in Nick's eyes, Laura chose to take the manuscript and read it herself. And at that moment, Nick took out the meaningful engagement ring. In Laura's waiting gaze, he slowly knelt down and gently placed the ring on her ring finger. Finally, To spend more time with family in the remaining years of her life, Laura chose the basic chemotherapy option. What she feared the most was her sudden departure, which would leave an irreparable wound for her little daughter. To help her daughter face it bravely, they decided to find the right time to tell her this painful truth. But every time they looked at their daughter's innocent face, they couldn't bring themselves to speak. To prevent their daughter from seeing her mother's hair fall out from chemotherapy, Laura took the initiative to shave off her golden locks. Nick also secretly chose the church and set the wedding date to make up for the regret of not having a wedding earlier. But the plan could not keep up with reality. After a period of chemotherapy, Laura's health continued to decline. The cancer cells were not only uncontrolled, but also spread rapidly like a runaway horse. In this dire situation, the doctor was forced to announce that the surgery was hopeless. This news nearly shattered Laura, but she still tried to appear strong. Seeing this, the doctor quietly handed them their favorite candy, hoping to bring some sweetness to their bitter life. But when they returned to the car, sadness and helplessness filled the cramped space. At that moment, a quiet decision began to form in Laura's heart: to leave without regrets. She secretly went to her most trusted assistant. She shared her plan to participate in the Bocas d'Or competition with her assistant, and invited her to join the competition. From then on, Laura decided to quit all her work at the restaurant to focus on training for the regional selection exam. One day, while deeply focused on training, she forgot to pick up her daughter. It wasn't until she got home and saw Nick's worried expression that she remembered. In response to Nick's questioning, at first, she planned to lie to cover it up, but Nick's sharpness and evidence made it impossible for her to avoid the truth. Laura hiding this from the hospital and family, and even disregarding her life, made Nick really angry. A fierce argument broke out between the two. Nick's voice was filled with anger and worry. During the argument, Laura finally confessed the real reason she wanted to compete. But when she spoke of her wish to leave without regrets, Nick responded with sarcastic words. Nick's words were like a knife, stabbing directly into Laura's heart. Finally, under the relentless questioning, Laura dropped all her defenses and confessed the deep fear in her heart. I don't want to die meaninglessly. I don't want to be just a deceased mother. When my daughter remembers me, she will proudly say that. That's my mother. At this moment, Nick realized his own foolishness. He was wrong to think that Laura's perseverance was selfish. Beyond the pain, he also felt moved. When he found out that the competition day was the same as their wedding day, Nick understood even more the significance of the competition to her. Although his heart was heavy with sorrow, he had to sadly agree to her final wish. Nick sadly agreed to her request. Late at night, he quietly left the house and gritted his teeth, throwing each wedding invitation into the trash, as if throwing away both the pain and helplessness inside him. With the progression of the illness, Laura's body grew weaker. She even started having uncontrolled nosebleeds. It wasn't until her assistant reminded her that she hurriedly made an excuse to go to the bathroom and leave. But her sharp-eyed assistant noticed something was wrong and quietly followed. When she saw Laura, with a haggard face and a needle mark on her hand, she assumed she was using illegal substances. Reluctantly, Laura had to confess that she had cancer. Although the intense daily training was exhausting her, when she received the good news that she made it to the finals, her pale face lit up with a smile. That smile contained perseverance and defiance against fate. Although the pain was relentless, just seeing her daughter made her feel that all the sacrifices were worth it. At the same time, the assistant was determined to support her to the end. She shaved her head, with the same hairstyle as Laura. That deep friendship warmed Laura's dark life. The day of the finals soon arrived. On that day, Nick took their daughter there very early to cheer for Laura in the final match. When the competition started, Laura relied on her skills and strong will to handle every step smoothly. At this point, Nick seemed to see the hope of victory. But as the competition dragged on, the exhaustion from the cancer began to show. Laura gradually became weaker. Her once graceful movements began to slow down, to the point where Nick in the stands became anxious, his hands drenched in sweat. At the decisive moment, Laura was so weak that she couldn't finish the dish herself. Fortunately, the assistant quickly realized, and in the final few seconds, she quickly completed the decoration. and thus, they completed the dangerous task just in time. When she saw Nick and her daughter witnessing her glory, she felt there was nothing left to regret in this life. Just before the results were announced, she hurriedly said goodbye to the assistant, and ran straight to her loved ones. Perhaps the results no longer mattered so much, because for a cancer patient, near the end of life like her, standing on this stage, was the greatest victory. In her final days, she, Nick, and their daughter, went back to their favorite ice rink from the past. On the ice, she glided gently, dancing beautiful, soft lines, as if returning to the vibrant days of her youth. She wanted to use this moment, for Nick and their daughter, forever remembering the image of her at her strongest and most radiant. And when the final move ended perfectly, it was also the moment her life quietly came to an end. This was probably the farewell gift, full of love and uniqueness that she left behind. In the following days, the house was silent without Laura's laughter, but Nick did not let sadness dominate forever. He learned from Laura's way. Every day, he collected eggs with his daughter, patiently teaching her how Mom used to crack eggs and make delicious cakes. Although Laura had passed away, Nick used his deep love to soothe the darkness in their daughter's heart, keeping the home always filled with warmth. This film may not have many dramatic twists, but the sincere love deeply rooted in Nick and Laura's bond still makes us tear up. In today's age, where divorce is becoming increasingly common, perhaps everyone longs to find a love that lasts a lifetime. But we must also hold firm to the principles like Laura did. The prerequisite for love is that both partners must first be loyal to themselves. This is not just an empty saying, but also wisdom in life and love. When we lose ourselves in love, the price to pay is often heartbreak. Only when we learn to value ourselves can we embrace true love.